Hello there, my zealots. This is Joshua coming at you today. Hey, how you doing? So last time I tried to do this, and instead my chat wasn't working. So I have to make sure that we can get. I went on a adventure. There we go. Let's try that one. Well, I did. So I went on an adventure to this place called Baltimore, where I was visiting a believer friend of mine. And I'm going to tell you this story because it's a really interesting story. On the way there, I ran into these two gentlemen that were pretty barren. We were in front of the other. I was in front of them. And I was like, I really don't want to talk to them about the Bible. I'm really, and I crashed. We woke up when the plane came close to where we were going. I got off the plane, visited my friend, and then out of time for their trip. And not only was it the exact same amount of time, but they got on the plane at the exact same time that I did. And not only that, they asked me to change my seat so that I could sit with them. And I was like, oh, God, I told God I would as long as as long as God gives me another opportunity. So I was like, all right. So, it was like a 4.5-hour trip, and we ended up talking about God the entire time. Not only were we talking, she kept telling us, it's really rude for us to talk where she can't want to talk. We weren't loud or nothing. Anyway, the point is we got to offend somebody, and that was fine. But the guy that I was talking to, he came at me with question after question. I had to meet him. Question for answer, question for answer, question for answer, question for answer. And it was like this non-stop, like it was brutal. It was almost like an endurance. At the end of this whole endeavor, I gave him his questions were very specific. So a lot of his questions revolved around exactly what is marriage. And because he really wants to know what the Word of God says. He wanted I believe his name was Noah. But anyway, he really wanted to understand what the Word of God says about marriage and about what is a biblical marriage. Now, a lot of people in modern day Christianity believe that marriage is in order to show it to you, but it's not in there. So there is no evidence there. And what is the definition of marriage? Well, from a worldly perspective, the definition of marriage is basically you have the government that you live in acknowledging the existence of your relationship. It's really that's all modern day marriage is. It's just the government acknowledging the existence of your relationship with your spouse. A wedding is just a celebration of that union between two people. Is it not marriage? And I was thinking that we could spend this time right now in this place discussing exactly what is marriage and how marriage works. So, first and foremost, what is biblical marriage according to the Bible? Well, according to the Bible, biblical marriage is if I have sex with a woman and I commit to taking care of her and providing for her and her offspring, so I'm supposed to provide food, shelter, babies, and I'm supposed to love her as I love myself. Those are the things that a husband is supposed to dedicate to his wife. What is the wife supposed to do? Well, the wife is supposed to submit to the husband as long as he fulfills every word of so if the husband tells the wife to do something, she's supposed to do it as the word. So if he contradicts the word of God, she would not have to do it. But in every other thing, if he tells her to do anything the word of God, she should be doing it. Boom, Temple OS, good to see you. So that is exactly what a woman and a man can expect. You need to realize that husband is there to make sure that you provide food, love you as he loves himself, And the wife is dedicated to making sure that she meet all the needs of her husband. Basically, she submits to her husband unless he tells her to do something that contradicts the word of God. So that is the basis for a biblical relationship or a biblical marriage. So let's say that you take away some of these attributes of what a biblical marriage is. All right, so let's say you provide food and you provide babies, but you don't provide shelter. She's providing her own shelter, and she doesn't need your shelter. Or if you're giving her babies, and you love her, but you're not giving her food or shelter. Well, there is a situation like that in the Bible, and it talks about it as 7 women will take hold of one man, saying, "We will eat of our own bread, wear our own apparel. Just let us be called by thy name to take away our reproach." This is what is known as a biblical concubine. And what I mean by biblical concubine, there are other references to concubines in the Bible, and from a biblical perspective, they're no different than wives. They are legally different according to the laws of the land, but their legitimacy, concubines are treated, from God's perspective, concubines are wives. There's really no difference between the two. Because so the wives are supposed to submit to their husbands in all things. And so why would there be a difference between concubines and concubines and wives? But from a biblical perspective, a concubine is the one that says, I will wear my own apparel, I will eat my own food. I just want you to provide me babies and love me. And that kind of relationship is basically the concubine status, as it says in the scriptures. Well, it doesn't call it a concubine. I call it a concubine because I've actually done a lot of research when it comes to the concubines, and the concubines and wives from a biblical perspective are identical. I can't find any difference. In fact, God himself considers wives concubines, or considers concubines wives. And there's evidence in there from when David was told that 10 of his wives were going to be given to his enemy. And when you find out what was given to his enemy was his 10 concubines. So the wives are concubines, or concubines are wives in the eyes of God. It's only just a worldly legal thing. So from a spiritual perspective, a real concubine is somebody that provides her own food and shelter, but relies on the husband for babies and love. And that's it. That's the only difference. So he has no financial responsibilities to taking care of her financially or with any kind of resources. He's not required to care for her with his resources, but he's supposed to love her and take care of her child, or love her and give her children. All right. So then what is a real marriage, a real relationship? Well, that is when a husband has sex with a woman and then provides food, shelter, duty of marriage, and loves him as he loves himself, loves her as he loves himself. And this can apply to any woman. So, like, from a biblical perspective, it even says this in 1 Corinthians, I believe, chapter 6 or 7, where it talks about if a man has sex with a whore, those two are one flesh. Okay. If two become one flesh, that means they're basically married. Now, Jesus Christ talked about a man cannot divorce his wife save for the cause of fornication. What does that mean, save for the cause of fornication? Well, if you have sex, like let's go back to our harlot example, or our hooker example. So you have sex with a hooker. You're now married to that woman. Now, if that woman, that hooker, sleeps with another man, guess what? She has now divorced you and now married another man. Because a woman can only have one husband. So this is what it says when it says that a man cannot divorce his wife save for the cause of fornication. So if she has sex with somebody else, then you're set free from that marriage. However, a man can have as many wives as he is able to take care of. It talks about Rabbah and what is it? Rabbah, and there's these two words, Rabbah and Yasef. Yasef, that's it. So in the Hebrew, there are two words, Yabah and Yasef, and I forget which one is which. But one of them talks about multiplying, the other one talks about adding. And when you study this, it talks about in Kings, or is it where is it? I think it's in Leviticus. Where anyway, it says that you're not supposed to multiply your wives. Okay, it says that kings are not allowed to multiply their wives, and that is in reference to the Rabbah. I think I can't remember now. It's either Rabbah or Yosef. I always get them confused. But anyway, so that one that references Solomon and in him, or that references kings multiplying their wives, that one means to have over an abundance, way more than is necessary. The other one is a reference to adding to. Okay, so like thou shalt not add to or subtract from the word of God. That is the other word. I can't remember what it is. If it's Yosef or Yosef or Rabbah. I'm confused. I hate when I do this. But anyway, so if you have this, so the concept is that you can add wives. That's not a problem. What you can't do is multiply wives. And the reason we know this is because in Exodus 21:10, it talks about you can have a wife. If you're going to add more wives, you have to make sure your original wife's food, shelter, or duty of marriage does not diminish. Food, shelter, duty of marriage does not diminish. What's the duty of marriage? Providing babies. If you're providing babies for her, you're good. If you're providing food for her and you're providing shelter for her, you're good. And then not only that, but you have to love the wife as you love yourself. And that's a newer command. So the adding to is allowed, but the subtracting but the multiplying is disallowed. It is considered, because it says not to multiply your lands, or it doesn't multiply your horses or your gold or your wives. Those things are over in abundance. Those are not necessary. It's becoming greedy at that point. You're now stealing from other people that might be requiring to be married. And so when Solomon had like 1,000 wives, that was a problem. So where is the line then? Where is this line drawn? And in the Old Testament, there really wasn't a line. They said don't multiply, but adding was allowed. Okay, they had this double mindset, but they never really strictly defined where the line was. How many wives can you have? Well, I looked into it, and there's one reference to a man having a plethora of wives that is in reference to the future, which was not yet condemned. And that was when it says 7 women taking hold of one man to take away our reproach. So I would say from a biblical perspective, 7 would be the maximum amount of, well, these would in this case be concubines, but it doesn't really go into more detail than that. So I would say like 7 wives and 7 concubines might be your max. Which is still, that's just ridiculous. You shouldn't have that many. But anyway, but I'm just saying, like, from a biblical perspective, I to push that max, that is the most I could possibly see. But I would honestly, the more conservative estimate would probably be 7. 7 would be your maximum amount. And that's from that verse that I'm talking about, where it says 7 women taking hold of one man. So anyway, so that is the concept. Now we get into weird things like, okay, so what if, and this is what he kept going back to, because he wanted to make sure. He was like, well, I've slept with all these girls. Am I still married to them? I'm like, well, depends. And he's like, well, if I am married to him, how am I supposed to handle it? I'm like, well, you have to provide food, shelter, and babies. And he's like, well, why can't I make them just concubines? I'm like, you can't make them concubines. The concubine vow has to come from the woman to the man. If the concubine vow is not made from the woman to the man, then the man is like, he doesn't have to say anything. He doesn't have to acknowledge her. A man has a choice on who he marries. But if a woman makes a concubine vow, he has to acknowledge it. He has to allow it. He has to say, okay, fine, you are my concubine and I will take you on and I will take care of you and provide for you and all this stuff. Okay, it's kind of like goodwill. It's kind of like what is it called? Where welfare. It's like a welfare system. If you are in this situation where you need somebody to take care of you, because wives, okay, so women, according to the Bible, are supposed to be married. Their entire purpose is to have babies, or sorry, is to first serve their husband, and second, make babies and have children. And I know that's harsh and rude and whatever, but that's the intention. That's the whole point. So a woman needs a man in order to fulfill her purpose. A man doesn't need a woman to fulfill his purpose. A woman needs a man to fulfill hers. So a man has a choice on who he takes as his wife. But if a woman is desperate to have a man of God that is righteous and he doesn't have any resources, he's like, listen, I can't take care of you. I can't provide for you. He's like, listen, I just want you to be my husband by name only. You be my husband and be the father of my children, and I'll take care of my food, my clothing. All right. You don't worry about a thing. I will take care of that. And I'm like, all right, cool. Do your thing. And that's how the concubine status works. If you slept with a woman and she does not want to be your wife, or you sleep with a woman and she doesn't want to be your wife and she goes and sleeps with somebody else, you don't have to worry about her. She's no longer your responsibility. She's somebody else's issue. You can just toss her to the curb and say, peace out, homie. So those are the issues. That's really the thing that we have to understand. So where is this all going? Well, the problem is that modern day society. So this guy's name, I think his name's Noah. And Noah had a really hard time because he was trying to explain this to his parents. And as he was explaining these things to his parents, he was struggling because he doesn't really know the material like I do. Like I can just quote the verses without even looking them up. So he kept calling me and asking for help as we went along. And I was like, cool, yeah, I have no problems helping him out and giving him but the modern consensus is that people assume that they know what the Bible is talking about when the Bible doesn't say anything about any of that. And it's a common occurrence. It happens over and over and over again. Women should be, as soon as a woman is of age, she should be looking to become betrothed. I'm not saying get married. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, as soon as she is an adult, I mean, like once she has a first menstrual cycle or whatever, if she is interested in having, if she's interested in men, she should, I mean, if she's super interested in getting married, you should probably try and find her a husband. If she is not interested in that, by the time she's 18, you should definitely find her a husband. I mean, regardless of, because it is a sin for a woman to be of her own authority. All right. A woman should not be looking to be of her own authority. She needs to be there. If a woman wants righteousness, if a woman wants to be righteous, she has to submit to a man. She has to. And that's why these women are saying, we will eat of our own bread and wear our own apparel. Just let us be called by thy name to take away our sin. That's what reproach means. They just want their sin taken away. Why are they sinning? Well, because they don't have a husband. They're single and they don't want to be single anymore. They need a man to serve. So we have to have this mentality that when we have when we have godly women and women find godly men, that they will if a man is not interested in marriage and he's not commanded to marry any of these women, well, this man can then say, listen, I don't want to marry you. And she's like, listen, I just need you as my husband. That's it. I just need you as my husband. I will provide my own food, my own shelter. I just need you to give me babies and love me. That's it. Can you do that? And he's like, yeah, I can do that. And this is going to happen. In fact, it's foretold in this age that will be a massive thing that's going to be happening in our era. Because in that same context of that era, it talks about how children shall be your oppressors and women shall rule over men. That's happening now. Like that's a massive part of our culture now, is that this ruling of men or children over adults. Anyway, so I mean, I put this out here so that you guys know. I have another situation that recently happened. I went to the thumb with a arrow yesterday. That was interesting. Yeah, I didn't know you could shoot yourself in the thumb with an arrow. It was crazy. I used a really short arrow on a really big bow and just thunk. The arrow just fell straight off the bow and was like, Dak. Yeah. So anyway, so I went to this coffee shop and I was writing on a regular, and I ran into this couple that was talking with their pastor or whatever it was. And they asked me about my book because my book looks dope because I have a really cool looking book that I've made. I've seen it. You've shown it to you. And I asked them if I could ask them a question. They said, sure. And I said, okay, so what is the unforgivable sin? And I asked them. And I found it interesting because when I asked them this question, it was cool because the man was not, because I used this example. I said that let's say that there's two guys. Okay, two guys. One guy's a good guy, the other guy's a bad guy. How do you tell them apart, right? I said the good guy can do bad things, the bad guy can do good things. How do you tell the difference? And as I went through this metaphor of how you tell the difference between a good guy and a bad guy, it was funny because the man started to disagree with me, but the woman totally agreed with me, and it really showed there's division between the two. Like he had been hiding as a good man in plain sight, even though he wasn't a good man. And I'll show you by example. So it says, I don't know if I've ever shown this to you, but I'll talk to you again about it. So the good man can do bad things, the bad man can do good things. How do you tell them apart? Well, the good man, or let's say a bad man does good things. Who does that person tell? If a bad man does something good, who does he tell? Well, he tells everybody. He wants to get as much traction out of his good work as he possibly can, so he doesn't have to do as much. You know what I'm saying? The whole point of him doing good works is so that people acknowledge that he's a good person, and he can basically deceive people in thinking that he's a good person when he's actually not. Because, evil people are about deception. They want to deceive. And the only reason they do good things is that people will think that they're good people. And that's deception, right? Well, when it happens when a good person does a good thing, who does he tell? Well, he doesn't tell anybody. He doesn't want anybody to know. He wants to do it. He wants his intentions to be totally noble. And the only way he can make sure that his intentions are noble is to make sure that nobody finds out about it. Conversely, a bad person does a bad thing. Who does he tell? He tells nobody. He doesn't want anybody to know. And when they find out, he's going to accuse and judge and make excuses, and he'll do whatever he can to avoid any kind of responsibility. When a good person does something bad, who does he tell? He tells everybody. He wants everybody to know because he wants everybody to hold him responsible, hold him accountable. So when I shared this example with them, the man was arguing with me about it. The woman was on my side, and these guys looked like they had been married for a while, and they started bickering with each other. Like he was like, and it basically divided this household right down the middle. And what does it say in the scriptures? It says, no, I've not come to bring peace, but to divide. Your enemy shall be of your own households, and two should be against the three, and three should be against the two. I just spoke this one little parable about this good person and bad person, and it just ripped this family apart, this husband and wife. So anyway, they left, and I ended up talking to the pastor, and the pastor was like, hey, and we started discussing some scriptures. Now, he wasn't really open to learning anything real new, but I explained to him exactly what the unforgivable sin was. And he thought he had understood it before, but once we had discussed it, he came to a more full understanding. I'm bringing this to your attention so that you guys know. I'm trying to basically fill time. But if you guys have any questions, we have been talking for about a half an hour. I really don't have much else to say. That was basically the things that had been going on in my life. I thought I'd share them with you. If you feel free to ask anything, if you're not down, then don't worry about it. Yeah, this whole point of me coming on here is basically to answer your questions. And if you feel like asking any questions or sharing your responses or doing anything of that nature, feel free to chime in and add your 2 cents. But if not, that's cool too. I come here every Saturday, 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I love God because I love virtue, justice, and salvation. Click the dingy thingies, share, subscribe. Yeah, you guys have a blessed day. Take it easy.